I've been saying for several years now how good Lando Norris is when he's in a rhythm and when he's driving under pressure. Absolutely superb to watch. We saw that in lights in Miami this year. But I got to say, today in Hungary, I've never seen Lando make more mistakes in the space of 2 hours. And none of them involved the way he was driving the car. The first was about 2/3 distance when they got on the radio to Lando for the umpteenth time saying, Lando, radio check, effectively to say, have you been listening to what we're saying? You should be letting Oscar past. And Lando, instead of simulating some sort of crackling noise, or indeed ignoring it completely, replied, yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. What was that all about? I mean, give me a break. I think the next mistake Lando made was his reasoning when he was having this ongoing discussion on the radio with his team about ceding the lead of the race. He made the point that if he had not been brought in before Oscar for the final stint, thus undercutting Oscar, he wouldn't have been in the lead, and they should have done that to Oscar. And they said something like, well, be that as it may, you need to let him past. Well, that was a mistake as well from Lando's point of view, I think, because what he should have been talking about was the first corner. Because at the first corner, Lando Norris on the pole moves to the right. Yeah, fair enough. He's allowed to do that. Oscar Piastri made a very good start from the inside. But as he goes down into turn one, it's quite clear that he's carrying too much speed. And sure enough, as he goes into the corner, he understeers wide. Lando does exactly the right thing. Talk about a team player. Moves to the left as well, to the centre of the road, centre left. And in so doing, of course, Max Verstappen is on the outside of Lando at that point, has to go way off into the runoff area. Who caused that? Oscar Piastri. Absolutely no doubt at all. And yet none of that was mentioned within the team. None of that was mentioned by the stewards, extraordinarily. And if it was deemed necessary for Max Verstappen to give his second place that he got out of that first corner when he rejoined the track, give that back to Lando Norris because he'd passed him when he was off track, why wasn't it necessary also for Oscar Piastri to give the lead back to Lando Norris on the basis that Lando only lost the lead because he ran wide and forced off Max Verstappen? None of it made any sense. Before Lando came in for that famous undercutting second stop, it was Oscar Piastri that was running wide, losing time and making mistakes and allowing Lando to get as near as he was to get the lead and the pit stop. So there were two things there. There were mistakes that Oscar was making under pressure from Lando, and beyond that, there was the first corner. And for that not to be mentioned by the team, and for the pressure to be put on Lando to have to give away a Grand Prix win, I think is absolutely outrageous. Now, I use that phrase, give away a Grand Prix win, because, yeah, I've been around long enough to know how difficult it is to win a Grand Prix. You don't play around with it. You have an opportunity to win, you take it. Now, you have to see that obviously in the context of the McLaren team and the team orders that the drivers have been given and the discussion they have before the race on Sunday morning. And given the evidence is there, and at this point, poor Lando and to some extent Oscar having to undergo a massive number of interviews and answer these points, but I'm not sure they'll give away the real substance of it. But given the evidence of it, it is that if McLaren are in the fortunate enough position to be running 1-2, the drivers are relatively free to race up to a certain point. Let's say half distance, let's say 3/4 of the race. The problem with that, of course, is if something like the first corner occurs. And I suspect that was in the back of Lando's mind. You can't really talk about that sort of thing in detail on the radio. You can't spend that much time on the radio, instead of which he talked about the undercut. But I think it goes even deeper than that. I think it goes... Well, on the one side of the coin, I think it goes to why on earth Lando Norris, when he renewed his long-term contract with McLaren, with Oscar Piastri already in the other car and looking really quick, why didn't he say, if you want me to renew, we need to be sure who's the championship contender here, and every opportunity I have to win a Grand Prix, I want to have it. Why wouldn't he have said that? I find it extraordinary that he didn't. Maybe overconfidence, maybe a bit of arrogance, thinking that he'd always be quicker than Oscar. I don't know. You can imagine a guy like Michael Schumacher. If a guy like Oscar Piastri, as quick as Oscar Piastri, had joined Ferrari when Michael's there, Michael agreeing with the team that, yeah, no problem. If Oscar has a chance to win the race and he's quicker than me and I'm right behind him, I'm happy to let that happen. He would never have done that in a million years. Winning the championship is about looking after the prime driver, and the McLaren prime driver, in my opinion, is Lando Norris. It's not in any way to detract from the talent of Oscar Piastri. He joined that team to the backdrop of having potentially to race the Alpine. McLaren, obviously a much better option. And now we're exposed to all the fallibilities of trying to run a race team like some sort of advertising agency or marketing company. It's a race team. They're racing drivers. And the day David Coulthard let Mika Hakkinen win that Australian Grand Prix in 1998 was the day David Coulthard effectively said goodbye ever to being world champion. And at the risk of stating the obvious, Mark Webber knows all about the pain of giving away wins to a teammate or having issues with a teammate when proper orders and proper structures are not in place within the team. This whole business of letting them race without running into one another and looking after the tyres and looking after the fuel consumption is a complete and utter non-starter. If you don't want to have to go down that route, you shouldn't have two drivers of equal quality in terms of pace. You have a driver like Max and you have a driver like Sergio Perez. You have a driver like Michael Schumacher. You have a driver like Rubens Barrichello. Simple. And I look at the final quote from McLaren to Lando Norris when they're saying, thanks Lando, you did the right thing. There'll be many more opportunities. Well, famous last words. Maybe there will be many more opportunities. But for McLaren to be thinking at this stage, when Max Verstappen and Red Bull have still got a sizable lead in the World Championship, to be playing around with who wins a Grand Prix, they're obviously confident that they're going to win many, many Grand Prix more in the second half of the year. Famous last words, as I say. And if Lando's going to win the World Championship, they said, oh, you're going to need the team and you're going to need Oscar behind you. Well, what are we saying? That if Lando Norris had continued to win that Hungarian Grand Prix, if he'd ignored radio team orders and he'd won that race, that the team would no longer have been behind him? Duh, I don't think so. Yes, he might need Oscar, but more importantly, he might need the points that he's just thrown away in the Hungarian Grand Prix. Much more difficult to recover than the help or not of the number 2 driver, Oscar Piastri. I say number 2, he's obviously not number 2, because as I've been saying from all along, he's super, super quick. And I did say when he joined McLaren that if you've got Lando Norris, you don't really want Oscar Piastri in the other car, because he's really, really quick. And we saw that today. And it's no wonder that it kind of ended in tears. I think Lando was absolutely superb when he got out of the car, the way he went over straight away to Oscar to shake hands with him. He went to the team. I can't imagine what it must feel like to give away a Grand Prix win like that. And it's not as if it was in a lucky situation because of that undercut. He was on the pole, for Pete's sake. Unbelievably good qualifying lap. And he'd been muscled wide at the first corner. And for the good of the team and his teammate, he let him have the room and lost the lead as a result. So I just don't get this. I really don't get it. And I'm surprised that McLaren, with Zach Brown, who is a racer, I'm surprised that Zach allowed that to happen, because he is a Lando Norris guy. And he is a guy that supported Lando from the start of his career. And yeah, for the good of the team, there's nothing will be at the good of the team. That will sit in the gullet of Lando Norris forevermore. There's no doubt about that. So it's all very well for everybody else to say, oh, isn't it a wonderful thing for the team that we have these 2 drivers that are incredibly cooperative? Oscar's going to help Lando. Lando gave Oscar the win. It doesn't work that way. These guys are racing drivers. And we saw it to some extent in the attitude of Max Verstappen today. This is a team that's won Max umpteen races and world championships now. It's the best team in racing, or was up until a couple of races ago. And Max on the radio today was absolutely livid. And he said whatever came into his head about the ridiculous strategy. And it was a ridiculous strategy that Red Bull had, allowing him to be undercut the whole time. And every time he came out, he's having to pass, or trying to pass, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. And despite 2 DRS zones, was unable to do so. And it ended in tears as well, with the 2 colliding. Monza 2021 style going into turn 1, and Max being, very, very upset after the race. And that's the way a racing driver should be. I'm sorry. Yeah, it sounded bad, but for the team to get on the radio to Max Verstappen to say, don't start talking about who was ahead at the apex, Max. It's childish to do that. Childish. I mean, who are they talking to? I can't believe a Red Bull employee said that to Max Verstappen in the middle of the race. I think it's absolutely appalling. Maybe I'm the only person that thinks this. I think the world has gone mad. Lando Norris should have won that race. Red Bull should not have been speaking to Max Verstappen about that. They should have been apologising on the radio for the strategy and trying to get the best from him in that respect. And Oscar Piastri, to be honest, True Grit, Steve Waugh, Mark Webber, all of the Australian stuff, and I love it all. I think the coolest thing in the world would have been for Oscar Piastri to say, no, I don't want this win. That's not the way I want to win a race. Give it to Lando. I'll beat him in some other situation, in some other time. And I think that would have been the coolest thing to do, because this didn't feel like a Grand Prix win to me. This didn't feel like I don't think it felt like a Grand Prix win to Oscar Piastri, to be honest. I suppose it does, because there'll be enough people around him saying, oh, wonderful, brilliant, Oscar, But I don't think it was a Grand Prix win. I don't think you can enjoy that sort of win anymore. Michael enjoyed it when he inherited wins from Rubens Barrichello, or, well, I think Eddie Irvine enjoyed it when Mika Salo let him win, because Eddie Irvine's that sort of guy. But normally when you're given a win like that, it doesn't feel like a normal win. Sterling Moss never really enjoyed winning that 55 British Grand Prix when he thinks Fangio let him win. I'm not sure he's right there, but anyway. And speaking of Sterling Moss, he always made the point, yes, the World Championship is there. Yes, it's kind of a nice title to have and maybe even a trophy. But the ultimate thing is the race. It's the race on Sunday. And what did we see today? We saw a race win lost because of this World Championship, that the team thinks they need to be behind. And if that's the case, Lando Norris has to give the win to Oscar Piastri. I don't see the logic in that. I really don't see the logic in that at all. And I certainly don't see the logic in a threat that if you don't give the win to Oscar Piastri, the team will not be behind you. I mean, that's what Lando's race engineer said to him. I guess he was the race engineer. I don't know if he was the race engineer, coordinator, strategist, whoever. But that was what they said to Lando. You want to have the team behind you, give this win to Oscar Piastri. I find that absolutely appalling, to be honest, that any team would say that to a driver and put him under that much pressure. To say, in effect, if you don't give him the win, the team won't be behind you. Of course, we know that's nonsense, but to say that publicly on the radio, I think is absolutely disgraceful, to be honest. So, as you can see, I'm very wound up, and it's a big question about whether I should put this video out, but I think I will, because I feel very strongly about this. I feel as strongly almost as I felt about the events at Abu Dhabi 21. I think it was absolutely disgraceful what we saw today, and I was very, very disappointed. Well, let's say I was about to say I'm disappointed that Lando gave him the win. Actually, I take my hat off to him, because there was so much stuff on the radio, and there was so much childish chatter about it's for the good of the team and all the rest of it, that I suppose he felt he had to do the right thing. And that takes quite a lot of strength of character. Even more strength of character will be required when he's got to smile and congratulate people and go to the team and do the team victory photo and all of that stuff. Because he knows how hard it is to win a Grand Prix. He knows how long he had to wait to win Miami. He knows how tough it is. He's been there, done that. And he had to give a win away today. And it was a good win. You know, it was a very, very good win. It would have been earned from a great pole, and it would have been earned from avoiding Oscar's first corner schmozzle and giving Oscar room, getting a great undercut call, being very, very quick and consistent, making the tyres last, under pressure, despite what they kept saying at McLaren, oh, we're so under pressure about the tyres are going to go off. Okay, they were scrub mediums, but they weren't going to go off that much. And McLaren was a really good car around Hungary today, particularly Sector 2, where they just had so much grip. It was just brilliant. In the early stage of the race, the way they got away from Max Verstappen in Sector 2, exactly what we saw in qualifying. So, yeah, given all of that, I think Lando could have, had he won today, he could have said, yeah, I won the race. I'm not going to be interested in talking about team orders. We'll talk about it behind closed doors. I'll help Oscar some other time when I'm world champion and he's about to win a race. But I'm not going to start compromising my world championship as distinct from the team, by giving him a win, because those wins are too hard to take. Going back to Max and that strategy, I guess the strategy at Red Bull, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here. I guess the strategy was in keeping him out so long on the medium tyre, and he's losing like a second and a half a lap to the McLarens and to Lewis Hamilton, actually. He came in very early for his hard tyres. I think the strategy was, as I pointed out in a little video I put out on Twitter just before the race, or X as we're supposed to call it now, I think the strategy was that because the Red Bull was so good on the hard tyre, they wanted to maximise Max's hard tyre stint, and they had a brand new set of hards, and they knew he was going to be quicker on that, relatively quicker on that than he was on the mediums. And so they wanted that tyre to be as fresh as they could when it was on the car. And I guess it was that, you know, let's extend the medium so that when he's out there on the hards, the tyres are nice and new and fresh and he can really make up ground. Of course, what they didn't factor in was how ridiculously difficult it is to overtake around Hungary, almost as difficult as Monaco. I mean, Max was coming out of the last corner. He got his half second behind Lewis Hamilton. He got the DRS detection. The DRS would open and he'd pull right up behind. As I keep saying, massive speed differential. But there's nothing he can do. I mean, I've got to say, Lewis Hamilton was absolutely superb in defence today, I thought. And we have a lot of talk. We've talked a lot about it on live streams. We've talked a lot about it on, in general, that, you know, overtaking per se is a great misnomer. Hashtag number of overtakes, I think, has done Formula One a massive disservice, because it detracts from the art of defence. And what we saw from Lewis Hamilton today was absolutely rock steady defence under pressure from Max, who had the DRS and had a slight top speed advantage anyway. Brilliant driving by Lewis Hamilton, I thought, and he really, really deserved that third place. Almost forgotten about, of course, in all the furore about Oscar and Lando and McLaren. I'm still absolutely staggered that a team as well balanced and managed and commercially nice and cool and socially media savvy and all these things you can throw at McLaren and being such a great team these days, that they managed to get themselves in that sort of twist about a race win which was due to a young Australian number 2 driver who's driven brilliantly for McLaren, but forced his way into the lead at the first corner at the expense of their number 1 driver, who's going to be with McLaren in the long run, who's polished and absolutely everything you'd ever want from a racing driver. I'm actually staggered that McLaren have exposed that side of their underbelly. It's just extraordinary to me that they could have got themselves in that position. Very simple. As I'm repeating myself now, it would have been very, very simple to have said to Oscar Piastri when he joined the team, look, if you're coming to McLaren, we're going to do all we can. It's probably going to be a very, very good car, Oscar, within a year or two. You're probably going to be in a position to win Grand Prix. But Lando Norris is our guy, and he's going to be our number 1 driver. You're there to help him, and we'll give you Grand Prix wins. Don't worry. Let's leave it at that. I'm surprised that they didn't do that. Why wouldn't they have done that? I just find it extraordinary. Anyway, I've said that probably 10 times now. And I suppose the other thing is that this does bring into focus the character of Lando Norris alongside a guy like, say, Max Verstappen. And we all know what Max is like when it comes to giving position to his teammate. Forget it. Ain't ever going to happen. And fair enough. He's a hard, tough racing driver who gets unbelievably annoyed if he's not winning races. And that's exactly the way it should be. And Lando Norris, I think, is a racing driver too. I think he's a tough racing driver. I really do. But I think he's got this sort of whole Zach Brown, McLaren, let's keep it on the easy path. Let's keep everything nice and balanced. Let's not have too much controversy, and social media is wonderful. If I was Lando now, if I was close to Lando now, I would be telling him to stop all social media and become as tough as nails, because that's what he should be, and absolutely give nothing away to Oscar Piastri ever again. That's what I would suggest he does. And he might then be in a chance to win the championship this year if Max Verstappen has a problem and Red Bull has a problem and a series of problems, enough problems to cost him a lot of points, which is very unlikely, of course. But if that happens, that's how Lando might be in a position to do it. He isn't going to do it if he's Mr. Nice Guy, playing Mr. Perfect in the team and doing exactly what they tell him. I think it's completely incongruous for a racing driver to be forced to have to think that way. He can think that way, but he's not a racing driver anymore. So anyway, that was the Hungarian Grand Prix. I can't even begin to think who was in the other positions, but let's have a look. Charles Leclerc, P4, good job in the Ferrari. He got in front of Carlos Sainz in the first corner drama and stayed there for the rest of the race. Max, who, when he had that final thing with Lewis, he had a couple with Lewis, but when he had the final thing with Lewis, went up in the air and ran wide, blah, blah, blah. Dropped back to finish behind Charles, and Carlos Sainz got pretty near him at the end. Sergio Perez drove pretty well, as I said. It was always going to be a fairly good weekend for Sergio Perez, and from nowhere on the grid finished P7. Yeah, good luck to Sergio. He'll be saying, well, I'm not too bad after all, am I, guys? And George Russell 8th. He beat George Russell. That's the other interesting point, that Sergio beat George Russell, because they're both out at the back of the grid, and it was Checo finished in front of George Russell. Yuki Tsunoda, yeah, scored another point or two, finished 9th, and Lance Stroll 10th, ahead of Fernando Alonso in the other Aston Martin. Another disappointing day for Aston. But yeah, all of that kind of incidental really to what happened at the front today. I hate seeing a driver throw away a Grand Prix win like that. I absolutely hate it, particularly if the driver deserves the position he's in. If it's clear, as it was in the Ferrari days, when Rubens Barrichello or Felipe Massa were there, or Eddie Irvine, when they're signing contracts that, yes, Michael is the number 1 driver and we will always be obedient if we're told to let him past. If that's clear, fair enough. You know where you're coming from. But it wasn't at McLaren. Quite obviously it wasn't clear. And I don't know why McLaren didn't do that. And Lando Norris, to me, has already earned the right not to have to give wins away like that to Oscar Piastri. And he's done enough for McLaren, let alone McLaren for him, but he's done enough for McLaren as well, been a part of their return to the front, to have earned that right. And And he wasn't given that today. And I think it was absolutely appalling. So there we are. We go into the other half of the doubleheader. I suppose it's a good thing. Everyone's going, oh, it's a good thing. You know, we can just go on to Spa now and put that behind us quickly. But things don't get put behind you. That will sit. As I say, it'll sit with Lando Norris for a long time. And who knows what will happen at Spa. It could be a mega Red Bull situation at Spa, and McLaren aren't even in the running all of a sudden. So what's going to happen then? How will Lando feel then? Oh, there was a win. I could have taken that. Of course, he feels like that right now, for sure. And anyway, next time Lando, and they say, Lando, you're hearing us? Radio check. He should say, sorry, what? And that should be the end of the discussion. Yeah, the radio people won't be too happy about it. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's the solution that he should have gone for, in my opinion. See you in a couple of days.